Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. This is Jessica Craho with the Iowa Coalition for Integration and Employment, and a part of your Employment First team. Welcome to today's Community of Practice. So we're going to be focusing on and talking about individual placement and support model today, or the IPS model. Before I introduce our presenters today, a couple of housekeeping things. We're recording today's webinar. I'll be sure to share that with the mailing list after the webinar today or before the week's over, along with the materials, including the presentation. That stuff is always posted on our YouTube channel under the archives, and you're welcome to access it there as well. So for folks that can't listen in live or want to catch something, you just go back to that archive and find it there. Feel like I'm forgetting something, but I think that's it. If you have any questions or comments as the presentation goes along, don't forget about the chat or the question in the control panel there. It's usually along the right-hand side of your screen. You just click on the little down arrow and type your question or comment in there, and I'll be sure to share it with the presenters. Again, really excited about today's presentation on the IPS model. And we have some of the best today to talk to us about it. We have Scott Witte from Haven, Rock Valley, along with his Minnesota partners, Katie Scholmann and Mike Dempster, to talk to us about the IPS model, kind of do an overview of the model and its basics. And then Scott's also going to tell us about what's happening in Iowa with IPS pilot projects. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Mr. Witte.
Hey, thanks, Jess, and hello, Iowa. Great to be with you today. Mike Dempster is the manager of Hope Haven's program in Worthington, Minnesota, the Acheivement Center, and serves in the role as IPS supervisor for the IPS program. Mike's been with TAC since 1997 and with Hope Haven since we acquired TAC in June 2010. Katie Scholmann has been the IPS employment specialist for TAC since IPS began in 2014. Again, my name is Scott Witte. I work for Hope Haven as Director of Partnership and Service Development. I've been with Hope Haven since 1979 and have been the administrator of My Choice Employment since its inception in September 2013. I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Katie now for an overview of the IPS model.
Why should a mental health system focus on employment? How many people with serious mental illness are working in integrated competitive employment? The answer is it depends upon what source you use. Generally, studies show less than 15% of the number of people with mental illness are actually employed. And this number has not changed since the 1990s. The ADA has had little impact on employment rate of persons with disabilities. How many people with serious mental illness want to work? Studies show that 2 out of 3 individuals would prefer to work. Why should the mental health system focus on employment? Work is the most normalizing goal we can help people achieve in this society. Don't ask if people should work or not. Ask how you can assist people in making and achieving their work goals. How you can help make the pieces fit. Employment is a central clinical concern. Work is a way to approach other treatment goals, combating boredom, finding structure, preventing isolation, avoiding substance use, etc. Help people identify with a worker image or a person who manages a disability versus a patient or consumer of mental health services. Next, we'll look at reducing fragmentation. IPS integrates evidence-based vocational services with mental health services. People with mental illness interact with many agencies, all of which have different policies, cultures, values, and eligibility requirements. An example of this is a person with mental illness who is seeking an employment may need access to services from a mental health agency for clinical services that may be funded by Medicaid. medical services, substance abuse services, housing support and services from other agencies, food support from SNAP, job development, placement services that may be funded by a state VR agency, access to employer recruitment programs funded by another workforce program, benefits planning from another agency, and long-term supports funded by another program agency. Why IPS? IPS is the only evidence-based practice that focuses on employment. It is research-based. The efficacy and effectiveness empirically validated through a body of rigorous research replicated in a wide range of settings by multiple investigators. Standardized practice guidelines. Critical ingredients are well defined. Manualized service approach measured by a fidelity scale. It's developed by real practitioners. Minnesota launched 4 evidence-based practices in 2004 for adult mental health services as part of Mental Health System Reform Act. They also launched in 2006 as part of the Johnson & Johnson Dartmouth Community Mental Health Program, and this was a partnership between mental health and VR agencies. IPS model, mainly developed by Becker and Drake, researched and disseminated in the early 1990s with few refinements. IPS is evidence-based practice for supported employment. Over 24 randomized controlled trials and several meta-analyses all support the same results for IPS improved employment outcomes. It produces superior employment outcomes when fidelity to the core practices are maintained, 60% versus 24. There is no research evidence that anything adverse happens to employed persons with psychiatric disabilities.
So there's this quote from Drake, one of the authors that wrote the manual for IPS, and he says, "Nothing I have studied has the same kind of impact on the people that employment does. Medication, case management, and psychotherapies tend to produce a small impact on people's overall adjustments, but the differences are often striking and dramatic with employment." I like to say, like my own personal, that adds some normalcy for folks. When people ask us, what do we do, or who are you? Most of the time, the first thing we say is, I'm an employment specialist, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, and this really helps with folks with mental health identify and fit into their idea of normal. How IPS is different from other types of supported employment is the employment is integrated with the mental health treatment team. There's not separate offices for employment specialists or voc rehab or mental health counselors. We're all located in the same area. We all attend case consultations together. We're seeing each other face to face. We're meeting with the clients as a team to really help them get to their goal of employment. It is the employment first approach for persons with serious mental illness. IPS is a person-centered approach where the client we're working with really is in the driver's seat. Here's a map of Minnesota. The blue are programs that are open more recently, and the green is more established ones. You can kind of just see the different years, how many programs are opening across the state. Map of the United States, all the different states that are participating in IPS. I don't need to read off those states for you, but you can see it's really spreading because it is very effective. In Minnesota, is this Minnesota? Oh, in the United States, just showing how competitive employment is growing with folks with the SPMI, the average.
46%.
There you go.
Of
40
those people
worked during 2006 versus 15% actually wanting to work, and how effective IPS can be. Minnesota data from last year, the total people enrolled in the state were 831, and 531 of those got a job. So 64% in the state of Minnesota, and the national percent was 41. So Minnesota's been very successful with this. And if you note the employment benchmarks on the bottom, 50% is considered a high-functioning program, and 31 is where they're just starting up and maybe could get some more training. And Minnesota is doing really well at that 64% average. Here's our data from Haven Minnesota last year. We served 28 people last quarter. 26 were working, and so our percent working was 93%. IPS, there are 8 principles of IPS: integration of employment with mental health team, zero exclusion, individual preferences are honored, there's rapid engagement, systematic job development, focus on competitive employment, proactive benefits counseling, and time unlimited individualized job supports. And we'll go into a little bit more detail with that. The first one, the integration of employment services, mental health treatment. Why do we want to be so involved and be everybody so close? It's because there's a lower dropout rate for the clients, customers, including the employers we work with, better communication, clinicians are getting involved, and the clinical information is incorporated into the employment plan. IPS is a 3-legged stool approach. It ensures that the team adheres to the principles, providing the best opportunity for individuals with mental illness to not only find a job, but to keep getting the supports that they have once they have the job. So that funding source in Minnesota is our voc rehab. Community employment is primarily the employment specialist going out, finding the job, helping work through the barriers once you get there, and then the mental health services, their therapists, their arms workers, things to really work together and create a stable spot for the clients to come back. Oh, we got rid of this one. So IPS employment services are integrated with mental health treatment services. Our plans, they need to be available to the clinicians. So we have a central health record that we all share so we can all read and communicate better. Zero exclusion, every person who wants to work is eligible. This is probably one of the hardest areas for people to get their kind of grasp the concept around, and that criminal record doesn't matter, drug use doesn't matter, medication compliance doesn't matter. If they say they want to work, we will jump in and help them to get a job.
Sort of reframing readiness for employment. Employability is a given, not a line to cross. People are ready to work when they say they're ready to work. And you can see in the lower right-hand corner, I'm afraid you've had a paradigm shift. So it's sort of a different play on the employment piece and getting people back working in the community.
I'll just share a quick success story because I'm not sure how much time we have. And I can always share another one if need be. But for example, of like the zero exclusion and the integration, when we first started, we got a client that moved from Missouri after she had been in prison for 15 years for attempted murder. And she was struggling with getting a job. She refused to leave her apartment. Every time I would go visit her, there would be 3 locks that would get locked when I came in. She only left to go to doctor's appointments and barely to even get groceries. And we tried several jobs in the community, but being around too many people just wasn't working for her, so we had to move to a smaller setting. And then she was let go from a position. She started to work at a hotel as a housekeeping, but just couldn't keep up because of her being a little bit older and having some carpal tunnel. So she was let go from that position, and she was actually offered a job by a different hotel as a breakfast bar attendant. And at that time, because of her record and kind of spotty job history, the manager said, well, I'll give you 1 or 2 days a week. And now, a year and a half later, she is working 5 days a week. She's leaving her home. She lives in a little tiny town called Pipestone, but she actually will travel to Minneapolis to see her children, versus before she wouldn't leave her house. And now she's working 5 days a week and enrolled in some college classes. She was actually highlighted in a story. She was actually highlighted in one of our magazines, the Horizon magazine, where you can read her story. She's come a long way. And another story also involving a criminal record. A gentleman, he was in prison for 30 years, and he was not able to work around persons that were under the age of 18. We found him a job, and he is working at a, can't think of it, like a large cafeteria type setting, and everybody that's there is over the age of 18. He was been there for 2 years working part-time and doing just a wonderful job. One more gentleman I can think of, his name is Chris. He's a young man, 30 years old, and very anxious, dealing with major depressive disorder. Had a little bit of a criminal history also, although IPS is not just about working with folks with a criminal record, to clarify. But he too started off working just 1 or 2 days a week and very much just doing dishes in the back room at a fast food restaurant. And over the course of a year and a half of helping him to move forward, he ended up being an assistant manager, and something that he never thought he'd ever be able to do. And through all the supports of IPS and his therapist, we were able to get there. So, another principle of IPS is individual preferences are honored. This is one of my favorite Peanuts cartoons, but if you see it, I'd hate to have a job where I have to get up early in the morning. I'd hate to have a job where you have to stay in the same place all day. I'd hate to have a job where you had to be nice to everybody. And it's a perfect example because I have some folks that don't want to go to work before 2 p.m. I have some folks that won't start work after 8 a.m. And so we honor what time, what location, the type of people they want to work with. People say they want to work at McDonald's. Well, that opens the door to 15, 20 different positions. And so we really narrow it down to what they're good at, what the manager thinks they're good at, and help them be successful in that spot.
Just to reiterate on what you just got done saying too, preferences are honored. Research shows that people with serious mental illness generally have realistic ideas about what they can do, how many hours a week they can work, what work environments are good or bad for them. Rapid engagement is another key principle of the IPS program. The job search starts soon after a person expresses interest in working. We want to engage them as soon as possible so that they don't lose interest and they don't think that they're going to get left behind or wait for an extended period of time.
Like, for example, oftentimes there's program guidelines when you guys, if you get more involved with the IPS, where you have so many days to make contact, so many days to fill out some, like maybe releases or a career profile, and then you have so many days to ideally find them a job. And Mike and I and the team, we have found that if you call them the same day you get the referral and even leave a message, it shows that you care and they believe, oh, someone's out there and they care about me and they want me to get this job. So the faster you talk to them, the more successful it is.
Another principle is systematic job development. Employment specialists build relationships with employers. They establish based on a person's work preferences, face-to-face with multiple visits, the focus on the employer's needs, find jobs that they may not be advertised, gather information about upcoming job needs, and periodic visits to employers. Networking is how jobs are found.
Networking is critical, and IPS really does take the 3 cups of tea approach. This book is an example, kind of like based on what you want to do, what you want to follow. But the first time you share tea with you're a stranger, the second time you take tea, you're an honored guest, and the third time you share a cup of tea, you become family. So we're not just walking into an employer saying, hey, will you please hire Bob, for example. We really build a relationship with that employer, find out what they want, what they're looking for, what they don't want, what makes a good employee for them, and build that trust so that when we do have the right person, that it's a good situation for both the client and for the employer. So competitive jobs are the goal, meaning we need to have at least minimum wage and the same wage that others receive for performing the same work in the community setting alongside others without disabilities, and is open for anyone to apply, not just for the individual. Benefits planning counseling is important. Personalized benefit counseling is always provided or at least offered, meaning we talk to them about what's going to happen to subsidized housing, what will happen to their food stamps, what will happen to their other supports that are income-based, so that it's not a surprise for them once they get working, because that can really throw a wrench in the situation if you don't know what's going to happen to all of your benefits. So we go through that very thoroughly and very closely.
And then these individualized job supports are time unlimited. Generally, according to the manual, which we go by, most folks are at least supported for about a year. Everybody's a little bit different. Some people have been in our program for ever since its inception 4 years ago.
We follow them minimum for the first 90 days of employment. Then we kind of leave it up to talk to them about the pros and cons of staying open with the program. We've had some people open since 2014. There's 2 of them. And then some people say at day 91, I'm good, I'll call you if I want to talk to you in the future.
And then earlier I said manualized. There is a supported employment fidelity scale, which sort of is the master guide to providing this IPS program. You might ask, why measure fidelity? It sets the standards of practice, and not all supported employment is created equal. This sort of sets a level playing field for all. There's no surprises in it. I think the book is about 150 pages. Mm-hmm. It's well written, easy to understand, and it really, sets the standards. And there's 25 points that you have to concentrate on, and the more closely that you follow the manual, the better outcomes you're going to have as far as people becoming employed and staying employed.
Next cartoon's a little blurry on the bottom, but it said, I had the dream about meaningful employment again last night. And so we want to measure fidelity so that the more close you implement the program and the practices, the better outcome that you're going to have for the consumer. So like Mike mentioned, there are 3 main areas, and there's 25 criteria for them, but staffing, organization, and services. We're not going to go into all those details today, but again, the manual speaks very clearly about what you have to do in each area.
Mental health funding for IPS varies from state to state. In our state, it happens to be voc rehab. In other states, it's Medicaid funding, targeted case management, federal grants, block grants, and other various local funding streams. So it's all a little bit different, and Scott will talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation here. So
some other resources that you guys can go and check out, ipsworks.org. They offered very clear, there's the manual on there, there's resources as far as required forms and training consultation. They're excellent at getting back to you, that if you have a question, they will respond to you in a very timely manner.
Okay. Since I joined Mike at the IPS training back in November of 2013, after we were awarded a grant from the state of Minnesota, voc rehab, I have been intrigued by the IPS model. Then, after we saw the first year of results, I got even more excited. And that kind of prompted me and Hope Haven to get engaged in, so what would it take to bring this valuable model to the state of Iowa? So I just put together a little bit of a time frame here on what's been happening since then. March 2015, we had Mike and Katie come to Iowa and present to some of our partners, funders, mental health providers, folk rehab, regional and state partners, and that kind of launched the discussion, I think. And everybody was kind of intrigued, and so we all kind of chewed on that for a while. From April 2015 through July 2017, actually, we've been regularly in conversation with our two nearby regions that Hope Haven serves, Northwest Iowa Care Connections and Sioux Rivers region. And I give the local regions a lot of credit. They really caught hold of the concept and really started identifying, so how might that look in our part of the state. September 2015, if any of you attended the Iowa APSE conference, you may have seen Mike and Katie present the same overview at the conference. So fast forward to August 2017. With encouragement, and this is pretty cool, with encouragement from our local regions, Kim Wilson with Northwest Iowa Care Connections, and Shane Walter and Aaron Haverdink from Sioux Rivers region, we held another gathering. So at that gathering, we were able to have Claire Courtney, who has been the project manager in Minnesota for the whole duration of the Minnesota Voc Rehab Grant Program in IPS. Claire came and presented from a state administrator position, and Mike and Katie also presented some information. At that meeting, we had not only our staff who would be involved in the service, but Voc Rehab, the managed care organizations, Jeff Lund and Denise Jewell were represented. We had our local mental health providers and our regional partners. And again, we just continued to kind of meld together this effort toward getting an IPS pilot launched. 2017, in November, we were joined in the effort by Central Iowa Community Services region. They had, we discovered through Kim Wilson at Northwest Iowa Care Connections that they too were considering IPS. So it was pretty cool that we started then the three regions conversing about how a joint pilot might look. So in December 2017, we had the next meeting, and that was a combined meeting of those three regions, both the state funders, the regional funders, as well as state partners such as IC, CAP, Iowa Medicaid, Department of Human Services, Tammy Amsbaugh, Lynn Nippelink joined us in Storm Lake for a meeting that talked about how IPS could be structured and launched in our part of the state. What we agreed to move forward with the creation of grant proposals for each region and to seek a consultant or consultants. February 2018, we were able to secure a personal consultation and training proposal from Claire Courtney, who is the lead Voc Rehab person in the state of Minnesota, and her colleague Carrie Olson-Leyva, who who goes around the state of Minnesota and provides training to IPS staff. We were so very fortunate that that we were able to work with Claire and Carrie to put together a proposal to bring the IPS model to the state, provide consultation, training to prepare us for our regional launches. You know, again, I think it's safe to say that the state of Minnesota, if it isn't at the top of the IPS Learning Collaborative in the United States, it's right up there with the others. So to have Claire and Carrie agree to come on their own time to Iowa and work with us, that certainly said a lot about what Mike and Katie have accomplished through the TAC program up in Minnesota. So in February and March of 2018, each of the 3 regions that we talked about earlier approved a joint consultation and training proposal, and also individual regional operations grant proposals. I should mention that, before I forget, I should mention that Hope Haven is working with Sioux Rivers and Northwest Iowa Care Connections, and Central Iowa Community Services is working with North Iowa Vocational Center, Sherry Becker and Kelly Kratz, longtime partners with Hope Haven, and so we're excited that they are going to be engaging the Central Iowa Community Services region in that process. Then finally, in March 2018, we had our first joint meeting of all 3 regions, the 2 employment service providers, Voc Rehab, IME, the mental health providers, as well as the MCOs, at a meeting to talk about actual forming of the collaborative. So some dates ahead of us. June 2018, we're going to hold the kickoff meeting where Claire and Carrie will come in and provide training to the partners of each of the pilots. That will be a combined meeting that we plan to hold in Storm Lake. And then come July 1, 2018, we will be launching the projects in each region. So I just want to talk to you a little bit more in depth about the consultation and training aspect, what we were able to build into our grants. And again, the consultation and training, that's pretty cool, because the 3 regions joined together to fund this and to participate in this portion of the grant projects. Phase 1 was the formation of the IPS Pilot Regional Steering Group, and that was the meeting that we held back in March. Phase 2, what we're involved in right now, is going through each of the 3 grant projects are involved in completing the IPS Readiness assessment, out of which will come any corrective action plans or any special attention we need to make to get aligned with the fidelity requirements of the IPS model. I mentioned the IPS introductory kickoff training that will come on June 18. Individual region training and consultation is phase 4, and that will also be completed. It looks like we'll get that all completed yet in June before the July 1 launch, which is pretty cool. Phase 5 is after we've provided the service for a while. Probably in the February to March 2019 timeframe, Claire, Courtney, and Carrie Olson-Leyva will actually be coming and doing a baseline fidelity assessment. And Mike and Katie can attest to probably one of the reasons why Minnesota is so very successful with IPS, and their results have been so positive from a percentage of people employed standpoint, is they are held to the highest fidelity standards, and they would attribute a lot of that success to that close fidelity to the model.
I would say with the fidelity, what's really nice about it is there's absolutely no gray. It's either you're doing it or you're not, and that's what makes it easy to follow, but also it just holds you to a high standard that you need to make sure you're doing it correctly because it's what's best for the client.
Yep, we don't have to figure it out. It's already been figured out for us. So basically, we just follow the rules.
I've heard both Mike and Katie talk about if you follow the IPS manual, you can practice the model with fidelity and generate the kind of results that we all would like to see. And then finally, the final phase in our consultation and training grant is evaluation of the pilot and development of the next steps. And that would be the last couple of months of fiscal year 2019. Just want to focus in a little bit on one of those phases. It's actually the phase 4 stuff. That's all of what is involved in that regional training and consultation piece. So we'll have a day where Carrie comes in and trains each of the regions separately, the employment specialists for each region. And part of the day she will spend on the book knowledge, and then she'll go out into the field with each employment specialist in the geographic region that they'll be serving. So we feel really good about that. Then there's, for the IPS supervisors, using outcomes to supervise IPS, and that is a day training, and that will involve Hope Haven's My Choice manager and NIVIC's manager, the folks that will be heading up the pilot projects in their specific regions. Then there's a half a day of specific training for mental health partners and professionals to support the integration of employment and mental health. And then on an ongoing basis, throughout the 12-month pilot, there will be a monthly TA consult with Claire and the trainer, Carrie, for each of the region, 1 hour per region. And then in addition to that, there will be a cross-pilot phone conference where all of our pilots together can be sharing information, what's going well, what's not going so well, and possible solutions to where we're running into problems, the sharing of best practice. Really looking forward to that aspect. So challenges, I think for us, launching IPS in Iowa. So in Minnesota, it's really clean. Voc Rehab is the funder. In the Minnesota grant projects, there's one mental health provider, and that's the local mental health center. As you know, in Iowa, we're a bit more scattered with with those aspects. So we have one of the challenges we're going to face, and we're already dealing with within our pilots, is we're going to be working with multiple mental health providers in each region, more than likely. And we also have multiple funding streams for job development and placement. So whereas in Minnesota it's only voc rehab, in Iowa it might be voc rehab, it might be the integrated health home who works under the managed care organization, as well as in certain circumstances we may also have regional funding for the IPS model. The other thing, and maybe Mike and Katie can talk a bit about this, the rapid engagement piece in performing eligibility and authorization, to actually engage rapidly in the job development process. We're going to have to, with our funding partners, we're going to have to figure out how to get people eligible and authorized for services in a very short time frame. And I put 7 to 14 days up there, and maybe you guys can talk about how that works in Minnesota.
Well, we only have one voc rehab counselor that we work with on our team, and each team typically only does have one voc rehab counselor. So she prioritizes making sure our clients are kind of put to the top of her list to get qualified for services so that we can get them engaged and get them going quicker. That's pretty much the only reason that it happens, is because our voc rehab counselor does put our clients first in the IPS program. So working with your guys' funders who's clicking the buttons, you're going to have a really nice close relationship with them, maybe buy them a lunch one day and see if they can move everyone to the top.
So yeah, that'll be great. I know in our process of doing the readiness assessment, we're already engaging the IHHs and voc rehab staff in that conversation. So that'll be fun to see where that leads. And finally, one of the challenges I see for the future of IPS in Iowa are the funding mechanisms and the cost of the service. In the state of Minnesota, the system or the mechanism for funding IPS in Minnesota is known as placement-based agreement, which is a 3-milestone payment system. And I'll let Mike describe what those milestone payment points are.
The initial milestone is sitting down with the potential candidate and writing an employment plan. Second one is their first day of work, and the third milestone is actually when they complete their 90 days successfully. So those are the 3 milestones, and each tier is paid at a different rate, and it's performance-based, and that's why it's tiered like it is. So the incentive is there for the vocational provider to provide quality services in order for them to reach maximum capacity and have success for that client.
Yep. Across the nation, the IPS Learning Center or Employment Center has said that the average cost across the United States for successful placement is right around $5,500. In Minnesota, what allows us to continue to exist and provide the service in Minnesota is that the state voc rehab agency provides state funds in the form of annual grants that help defray some of those costs that if that grant money were not there, we probably wouldn't be able to to make it financially with just the placement-based agreement. So, and they recognize that, and they put state dollars along with that, toward that end.
So, kind of to conclude things, people with severe mental illness can work in competitive employment. Programs following evidence-based principles of supported employment, IPS, have much better outcomes. And the integration of employment and the mental health, which makes IPS different than any other approach to supported employment. And programs must adhere to financial and organizational barriers to be successful.
So with that, I guess we're open to fielding any questions that might have come your way, Jeff.
Perfect. Wonderful. So if folks have any questions, comments to share, go ahead and type those in right now. I know I had a couple that I might ask maybe while we give folks a chance to respond. Katie and Mike, and this was kind of towards the beginning of the presentation, but you shared the numbers of folks that you served this past quarter, and then how many of those individuals were working. Some great numbers. And I wondered if some people out there might be asking themselves or wondering how many of those folks then remain in those jobs. And I lost the word I'm looking for, but I'm sure you know it. But of those folks placed in during that quarter, do they remain in those jobs long term? Do you see that that the matches are good and that they remain?
Actually, yeah. I'm going to look at my list really close right now. We have some folks that have been in the same job for, looking at my list, one is 3 years, one is 2 years, one is 6 months, one is 2.5 years, and those are the ones that wanted to stay open a little longer. If they choose to close, then we don't keep track with them and check in with them as often, but it is shared at our case consults with the mental health center that they are retaining their job. And just because they get a job, we just don't say, oh, good, you already got yours, we're going to move on. We make sure it's the job that they want to do and something that they want to stick with. So we follow them very close to make sure they have that job retention.
Retention, yes, thank you.
Across the nation, the IPS Learning Collaborative does not, as I understand it, does not collect retention data. One of the things we didn't spend a lot of time on is that, and some of you probably noticed that this is not a, when you compare IPS to customized employment, there is not a discovery piece leading to employment.
It's learned on the job.
Yes, the assessment is, as Mike said, is on the job, and it is, and this is a kind of a tough shift to make, but the IPS model says that to the person who tries a job and leaves it,
it's not considered failure. It's looked at as a learning lesson and move forward. And that's another reason why they don't do retention data, because if a person does lose a job while we are serving them, it is our responsibility to find them another one. And another one, some people have went through as many as 5 or 6 different jobs, and they're still in the program today. So
if we look at it so you got a job, you've been chronically late because you have to be there at 7 in the morning. Hey, we know you don't like to get up early. So let's go find a job that doesn't start until noon. Or maybe you have small children that you need to make sure that they're at school. Or perhaps you use some substances. We find out what time of the day they like to typically use alcohol. If it's in the evening, we'll rotate their shifts around their other extracurricular activities. And if they lose a job, it's okay. We just know not to do that in the future, or work around it, or find a way to work through it.
Makes sense.
The other thing that has really spoken to me since I've became familiar with IPS is that focus on how important employment is to a person's recovery. And it's been proven that people, as they are employed, it actually increases their ability to cope with and live through their mental illness. It is not at all a model that says you have to meet a certain level of control of symptoms in order to be employed. In fact, we're privy to some information that would suggest that in fact speeds up the recovery process and the stabilization process.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I think often we maybe hear examples or stories of individuals who are wanting to work in the community and might be working in a different setting, and they might be experiencing an increase in their mental health symptoms, and that might be viewed as readiness or not being ready for a job, or that there has to be a certain level of control before kind of pursuing maybe career exploration or that job in the community. And it sounds like with this model, it really just, and with the whole team around the person, right? So you're maybe addressing those active mental health symptoms with their mental health providers while you're working on the job stuff as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's a real, as we, the employment provider and the mental health provider and the funder join together in that effort, it leads to seeing employment as an opportunity for more and more people. I mean, just having that exchange with the mental health provider, and as they experience having client or clients placed in employment, that opens up that idea of, well, if it worked for John, it could work with Sue, and that referral network, that referral volume has picked up over time as our partnership with our mental health provider has increased, wouldn't you say, Mike and Katie?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I'm not used to doing this webinar, so every once in a while it gets quiet, and it's because I'm nodding instead of saying that out loud, so I apologize.
We had a question come in asking what the manual is called and where can folks access it? Where can they get it? IPSworks.org website.
You can order it offline there, and it's called, it's funny, I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I want to say Employment Works, but let me double check. But it's right on the IPS. IPSworks.org is the name of the website.
Their website is very informative. There's samples of everything. There's posters, bookmarks, everything that you can imagine that you would possibly need to get started is available at the website, including the fidelity manuals. There's sample fidelity scales. There's looking at different videos from different perspectives, family members, from the client's perspective, the mental health providers. There's also online trainings available for the employment specialists, the IPS employment supervisor, and also for the vocational service providers as well. Everything's real individualized and clear-cut, easy to understand. And if you have questions, they respond very quickly. We've even caught Debbie Becker, one of the authors, getting off a plane one time. We had a question. She was coming off her plane and answered our question, I want to say within an hour or something like that. So very, very helpful people that want to see IPS spread in the United States.
Yeah. again, I think it just speaks to the success of the model. We intend, so we're currently in the process, and we've identified, we're close to finalize employment specialist hires for each of our 2 regions. Besides the training that Claire and Carrie will be doing for those folks, we will be asking them to do the online training off of the IPS Works website. And we also will be having them do some job shadowing with Katie as she provides the service in Minnesota. So we feel that'll really give our new IPS employment specialists as much support and training heading into this as we possibly can. The other plug I want to put in, I noticed that tomorrow's ODEP webinar is actually on IPS as well, and it's being presented by Debbie Becker. So I encourage any of you who have access to that training to click on and join that webinar.
I will say, I just looked up, the name of the book is IPS Supported Employment, the manual, and it says a practical guide. So IPS Supported Employment, a practical guide, and that's, you know, Debbie Becker and Sarah Swanson that wrote that, but it's available on the ipsworks.org website, and it tells very clear whose role, who does what in each role, when to do it, and so forth.
Nice. Well, and I'll be sure to share that that website link back out again when I send out the recording and the presentation. And I know you guys had it in the presentation, as well as kind of a screenshot of the IPS site, which is nice. Can you guys think of anything else that you want to share or address before we wrap things up here?
I just want to put a shout out again to our 3 regions who are not only funding the consultation and training aspects, but each of the 3 regional pilots are, those regions have granted each of the employment programs dollars to start up during the first year of operation. And so a shout out to Northwest Iowa Care Connections region, Sioux Rivers region, and Central Iowa Community Services region. We wouldn't be able to pull this off without their support.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're all excited to hear what comes of the pilots and what we learn and the successes that you guys have. Really grateful that you spearheading this work and kind of taking the lead and guiding us along the way here. It's really exciting. So without further ado, I guess we'll wrap up here today. We'll almost got you out a little bit early, but thanks again to Scott and Mike and Katie. Again, their contact information is there. I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you reached out if you had any questions or comments or resources that you're looking for related to this. Scott, thanks for making a plug on the ODEP community of practice. Everybody is welcome to participate in those, and if you're not sure how to do that or how to access that, just email myself or even Leanne Russo, and we can get you connected to that listserv and signed up to participate in any of the ODEP community of practices that you find interesting or of value. We will be back on June 12th from 1 to 2 p.m. with the most wonderful Dr. Sue Ann Morrow. She's going to be talking to us about the role of systematic instruction and supported employment. And that is not going to be your run-of-the-mill systematic instruction training. Of course, Sue Ann will hit on some of the basics and do a little bit of an overview for us, but she's going to kind of take us out of the box and take us to the next level. So please join us back in June for that. Don't forget that you can utilize the community of practice trainings as your ongoing training and education requirements for your supported employment, for your staff and for yourself, for those ongoing education credits that you need. Let me know if you need a certificate for attending today's training. If you or your staff or a team member listen to anything in the archive, I don't really have a way to track that, so I've been asking agencies to track that on their own, but I'm happy to share the template with you or with your supervisor who's tracking that. So please just give me a jingle if you need access to that. And I think that's it. I'll send out everything. Oh, I've got one more question. Sue Ann is looking forward to June. We are looking forward to having you, Sue Ann. So we'll see you all back June 12th from 1 to 2 p.m. and I'll get all the materials out from today, hopefully before the week is over. And thanks again, Scott, Mike, and Katie. You guys have a good rest of the week.
You too.
Thank
you.
You're welcome, guys. Thanks a bunch. Stay safe from the lightning.
Thank you.
Have a good drive back. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.